A storm was raging in New York City. Lightning cut through the dark sky, briefly illuminating the chaos in the streets. Cars sped past, raising waves of dirty water over the sidewalks. Few ventured out into the storm, but Adam Stewart was an exception. He walked against the wind, his gaze fixed on the ground, his footsteps echoing on the wet sidewalks. Adam, at 34, was the definition of success in the financial market. His company, Stewart Capital, had become an empire, with branches in several cities around the world and investments in excess of billions of dollars. The image he projected was one of perfection and control. His clothes were always impeccable, his movements calculated, and his words precisely chosen. But that night he felt anything but in control. "Don't you see what's happening? The shares have plummeted. This could be the beginning of the end." The voice of Ricardo Vargas, his longtime partner and friend, still echoed in his mind. The board meeting moments before had been carnage. An accounting error in a billion-dollar merger had cost the company not only money, but also the trust of some of its main investors. Adam hated to fail. Since he was a teenager, he had vowed never to be vulnerable. When he was just 12, he had seen his father, a small businessman, lose everything during an economic crisis. His father's defeated look, sitting at the kitchen table, was still a vivid memory. "Never depend on anyone," had said his mother, the only stable figure in his life at the time. And Adam took that to heart. He built his life around this philosophy, erecting emotional walls that no one could get through. That night, however, something seemed different. Perhaps it was the fury of the storm, or the restlessness growing inside him. He was so lost in his thoughts that he almost walked straight into the alley where his life would later change forever. The sound came first. A dry cough, followed by a heavy sigh. Adam stopped, frowning. It wasn't unusual to find homeless people on the streets of New York, but something about the quality of that sound, almost desperate but stubbornly resistant, caught his attention. He turned slowly, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dim light of a nearby lamppost. Under a worn-out awning, huddled in a pile of blankets and plastic bags, was a young woman. Her hair, dark and disheveled, was stuck to her face by the rain. There was something almost surreal about the scene, the contrast between her physical frailty and the strength evident in her gaze. "Is everything all right?" The question left his lips before he could stop himself. Immediately, he regretted it. What was he, Adam Stewart, a billionaire and symbol of power, doing talking to a stranger in the street? The woman slowly raised her eyes. They were a deep brown, almost golden in the flickering light of the street lamp. Even under the obvious exhaustion, there was something in those eyes that disconcerted him. "Yes, you are. I'm just waiting to pass," she replied, her voice hoarse, as if each word took effort. Adam stood still for a moment, not knowing how to react. He was a man of action, used to solving complex problems with a simple phone call or a signature. But in that instant, he felt powerless. "Do you need help?" he insisted, his voice lower this time. There was something in the way she looked at him, defiant but not hostile, that made him want to insist. She shook her head, an almost imperceptible movement. "I'll turn around." He hesitated. Everything inside him told him to move on, continue his walk, and forget that encounter. But he couldn't. Something held him there, as if he were looking at a version of himself that he didn't understand. "Well," he said, finally breaking the silence, "take care." And then he left. But her face stayed with him, haunting him as he walked through the flooded streets towards his penthouse. When Adam entered his penthouse on the Upper East Side, he was greeted by oppressive silence. The apartment, although luxurious, seemed empty. The glass walls offered a spectacular view of the city, but that night all he could see was darkness and rain. He threw his overcoat on a chair and headed for the bar, pouring himself an expensive whiskey. He tried to concentrate on reviewing the company reports, but the words danced across the screen. His mind kept going back to the alley and the woman under the awning. Who was she? What had brought her to that point? And why did he, of all people, care? Adam wasn't known for his empathy. He was practical, direct, and, as many said, cold, but something about that woman bothered him in a way he couldn't explain. He picked up the phone and, without much thought, called Ricardo. "Are you still awake?" "Adam, for God's sake, it's 2 a.m, grumbled Ricardo, clearly irritated. "I saw a woman today, a homeless woman. She looked—" Adam stopped, realizing how ridiculous that sounded. "Are you drunk?" Ricardo interrupted, now sounding more puzzled than annoyed. "No, just—" "Forget it." He hung up before Ricardo could say anything else. Adam was up all night, pacing back and forth in the living room. He didn't understand why this woman affected him so much, but he knew he couldn't just ignore his feelings. The next morning, Adam found himself heading down the same alley again. He told himself that he was there by chance, but the truth was that something had brought him back. The young woman was still there, sitting in the same corner, wrapped in her blanket. This time, she seemed more fragile, but her gaze remained defiant. Adam stopped a few steps away from her, holding a cup of hot coffee he had bought on the way. "Would you like some?" he asked, holding out the cup. The young woman looked at him, hesitated for a moment, and then took the coffee with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she said, her voice almost inaudible. It was the first time he had heard gratitude in her tone. Adam sat down next to her, ignoring the uncomfortable feeling of the cold, damp concrete in his expensive wool coat. "What's your name?" he asked. She gave a small smile, more to herself than to him. "Tessa." "Tessa." He repeated the name, as if testing how it sounded. "Do you live here?" She laughed softly, the sound dry and almost bitter. If that can be called living. Adam didn't know what to say. He had always been good at negotiating, but this conversation seemed different, more difficult. "Do you have a family? Anyone who can help?" Tessa's expression hardened and she looked away. "No, my mother was all I had, and she died 2 years ago." "I'm sorry," said Adam genuinely. It was a phrase he rarely used, but at that moment it seemed the only right thing to say. Tessa shrugged, as if trying to dispel the pain that was still so evident in her eyes. "Life goes on, right? Or at least it should." For some reason, that answer stirred Adam. He had always believed that he could control his destiny, that it was just a matter of will and effort. But Tessa seemed to be living proof that sometimes life had other plans. "You're going to freeze out here," he said. She looked up, already accustomed to his presence. "I'll live," she replied, pulling the blanket up over her shoulders. Adam sighed and held out a bag for her. "I took a jacket. It won't solve everything, but it'll help." Tessa looked at the bag and then at him. There was something in her eyes, not mistrust, but a mixture of pride and resignation. She knew she needed the help, but accepting it seemed to cost more than braving the cold. "You don't have to do that," she said at last. "It's logical. You need a jacket. I can buy one." "Why complicate it?" he replied, crossing his arms. Tessa laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You make it sound so simple." "Because it is simple," he insisted. "You're out here, struggling to survive, and I'm offering to help. Why don't you take it?" She was silent for a long moment, and Adam thought she would refuse again. But to his surprise, she took the bag and held it in her lap without looking inside. "Thank you," she murmured, almost inaudibly. As the weeks went by, Adam began to bring Tessa more things. A hot meal, a new pair of shoes, even a small pillow to replace the one she was using. But as much as he wanted to help her in a more meaningful way, Tessa had her limits. "You could get out of here, you know," he said one day, as she ate the sandwich he'd brought her. "I can help you find a place to stay." Tessa shook her head before he could finish. "No, I'm fine." "You're fine." He gestured around, indicating the filthy alley and the bags full of rags that she called home. "Is this life for you? I don't want to be your charity project." Her voice was firm, but there was an underlying tremor that didn't go unnoticed by Adam. "I'm not someone for you to fix." Adam was silent for a moment, trying to process those words. He had never thought of her like that, but perhaps there was some truth in what he was saying. Maybe, subconsciously, he was trying to prove something to himself. "You're not a project," he finally said. I don't know why, but I feel like I need to help." Tessa stared at him for a long moment before looking away. "I appreciate the coffee, the blankets, the clothes, but this here," she pointed to herself, "is something no one can fix." Despite Tessa's resistance, Adam didn't give up. He began to show up more often, always with something to help her, but trying to respect her limits. Still, frustration grew inside him. He wanted to do more, but she refused to accept anything that seemed to be more than momentary help. "You need a job," he said one evening, as the two of them sat side by side in the alley. "I can get you something." Tessa laughed, but there was no joy in her laughter. "I'm an ex-teacher, Adam. Nobody wants to hire a homeless woman who doesn't even have an address to put on the form." "Then create an address. Use mine. Nobody needs to know." She turned to him, her eyes burning with indignation. "You don't understand, do you? I don't want anything to look fake. I don't want to look like I'm taking advantage of you. That's not taking advantage. It's accepting help. For you, it's simple. Not for me." Adam took a deep breath, trying to contain his frustration. "What about a shelter? It doesn't have to be permanent, but at least it's better than that." "Shelters have rules, Adam, and they're often more dangerous than the streets. Do you think I'm here by choice? I'm here because it's the only place where I can keep a bit of my dignity." The word dignity hit him like a blow. He had never thought of the streets as a place where one could maintain dignity, but perhaps for Tessa it was exactly that. She still had control over her life, no matter how small, and she didn't want to give it up. Over time, Tessa began to open up more about her life. She told Adam about her mother, a kind woman who worked as a nurse and always put others first. She was the kind of person who would stop eating to give someone food. "I think I inherited that from her." "But what about your father?" asked Adam. Tessa shrugged. "He left us when I was little. My mother was everything to me. When she got sick, I did what any daughter would do. I sold what I could, took out loans. I thought I could fix everything. But you couldn't." "No, and now I'm here." She looked at him with a sad smile. "Every time I asked my father for help, he made me feel like a burden in his life. My grandmother too, all my life. It broke me inside, and I promised myself that I would never go through that again, even if it means going through such difficult situations. But I won't be a burden. I've accepted that this is my life now." Adam wanted to shout that she was wrong, that her life didn't have to be like this, but he knew that for Tessa, words wouldn't be enough. She was a woman who needed to believe, and that would only come with time. After weeks of sporadic encounters in the alley, something began to change. Tessa, so determined to keep Adam at arm's length, realized that there was something different about him. He wasn't like the other people who, time and again, offered alms or words of pity before disappearing forever. Adam came back, day after day, with the same relentless insistence, and most importantly, he didn't look at her as a victim. One evening, as the snow began to fall softly, Tessa finally gave in to a longer conversation. "Why do you do this, Adam?" she asked, as she held the glass of hot tea he had brought. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, but from vulnerability. She never liked to ask why. Questions opened doors to answers that could hurt. Adam looked at her, reflecting for a moment. "I don't know. Maybe it's because I see something in you that I can't ignore." "Something like what?" She arched her eyebrows, defiant, but there was a touch of curiosity in her voice. "Resilience," he replied without hesitation. "You don't give in. Even here, even with everything against you, you still persist." Tessa looked away, uncomfortable with the compliment. "Persisting is all I can do. It doesn't mean I'm winning. Sometimes just surviving is a victory." She remained silent, surprised by the depth of the answer. As much as she hated to admit it, his words carried a weight she hadn't expected. Over the next few days, Tessa began to let her guard down, albeit subtly. She stopped immediately rejecting Adam's gifts, although she always insisted that he didn't have to do anything for her. "I brought soup today," he said one afternoon, taking a thermos out of his bag. "It's hot. Chicken, I think." Tessa looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and reluctance. "You're going to keep doing this until I have no choice but to accept it, aren't you?" "Exactly," he replied with a slight smile, something rare on his face. "I'm stubborn." "Got it." She picked up the bowl and began to eat slowly, savoring each spoonful. "You know, you could just donate it to a charity or something. Why me?" Adam was thoughtful for a moment. "Because you remind me that not everything is about money. Sometimes it's about people." Tessa stopped eating, staring at him with a curious look. "That sounds like something you'd never say." He laughed softly. "Maybe you're changing me." She smiled for the first time. "Maybe." Winter in New York became more relentless. Temperatures dropped dramatically, and Adam began to worry more about Tessa's safety. He knew he couldn't force her to accept his help, but he was determined to do everything he could. "Look," he said one evening, handing over a small envelope. "This is a prepaid card. You can use it to buy food, clothes, anything you need." Tessa held the envelope, hesitating. "Is this a gift, or a way of making me depend on you?" "It's just a way of making sure you're okay," he replied sincerely. "I don't expect anything in return." She looked at him for a long moment before finally accepting. "Thank you," she murmured, almost inaudibly. It was a small gesture, but for Adam, it was a milestone. For the first time, she was beginning to trust him, even if it was just a little. Later that day, when Adam returned with some soup that his cook had made, he noticed that Tessa was getting sick. It was to be expected, since she had been exposed to that low temperature all day. "I'm fine," she replied, although her voice betrayed her fragility. "I just need to rest." "That's not something you can ignore, Tessa. You need to protect yourself from this cold." She tried to protest, but she was too weak to argue. Adam took her in his arms, ignoring her attempts to resist. "Put me down, Adam. I can walk on my own." "You can't even stand," he replied, determined, "and I'm not going to let you freeze to death in here." Tessa finally gave up, resting her head on his shoulder. It was the first time she had allowed herself to be looked after, and the weight of this moment did not go unnoticed by either of them. He didn't suggest taking her home, knowing that she would refuse. Instead, he found a modest little inn, discreet but comfortable. He chose it carefully, knowing that Tessa valued her independence. "You don't have to stay here forever," he said, as he helped her carry a small bag with the few belongings she had. "It's just until you feel better, until this harsh winter is over, or whenever you want." Tessa looked at him, assessing his intentions. There was something in Adam's eyes, a mixture of determination and vulnerability, that disarmed her. For the first time, she didn't protest. "All right," she said at last, "but I'll pay you back." Adam laughed. "With what? Your hidden fortune?" She arched an eyebrow. "With whatever I can. I don't want to owe anyone anything." "You don't owe me anything, Tessa," he replied seriously. "It's not a loan. It's just help. Help that you insist on giving me," she said, crossing her arms. But there was a small smile at the corner of her lips. "Thank you, Adam." It was the first time she had really thanked him. And he felt something different inside. It wasn't triumph or pride. It was something deeper, more genuine. It was the feeling of finally being connected to something beyond himself. In the days that followed, Adam visited Tessa regularly at the inn. He brought her books to read, magazines, and sometimes food from his favorite restaurants. Despite her attempts to keep him at arm's length, she began to let her guard down. Little by little, the conversations became more personal, more intimate. "Have you always been like this?" she asked one day, while leafing through a book he had brought. "So stubborn," Adam laughed. "Probably. Ever since I was a kid, I always thought I could fix things, solve people's problems. Do you do that with your friends too, or am I the only person who has to deal with your generosity? You're the first person in a long time that I've really wanted to help," he confessed. "My friends, my team, they don't need me. But you—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You remind me that not everything can be bought." Tessa was silent, absorbing those words. She had never thought of herself as special, let alone as someone who could inspire someone else. But little by little, she was beginning to believe that maybe there was something in her that was worthwhile. As the weeks went by, Tessa began to accept Adam's help with less resistance. It wasn't easy for her. Every small gesture of kindness felt like a reminder of her vulnerability. But at the same time, she couldn't deny that he really cared. One evening, as the two of them sat in a small common room at the inn, Tessa made a confession. "I've never trusted anyone, Adam. Not really. My mother was the only person who was always there for me, and after she left, I learned that trusting others only leads to disappointment." "I understand," he said, with a faraway look in his eyes. "I've built my whole life on that idea. I've never trusted anyone completely, not even my family." "Then why are you doing this now?" "Because you're different." He looked at her, his eyes fixed on hers. "You don't want anything from me, and yet I feel I have something to offer you. Something that isn't about money or power." Tessa didn't reply immediately. There were so many things she wanted to say, but didn't know how. Instead, she just nodded, allowing the silence to say what she couldn't. Adam and Tessa's relationship continued to develop, with ups and downs. There were days when Tessa was more open, sharing stories of her childhood, her dreams of becoming a teacher, her happy times with her mother. But there were also days when she withdrew, reminding herself that her life on the streets was not something that could be erased with kindness. Adam, on the other hand, was changing. He began to realize that his priorities were adjusting. The man who once lived for work now found pleasure in little things, like hearing Tessa laugh or watching her read a book with renewed interest. He didn't know exactly what he was feeling, but he knew it was important. One sunny afternoon, as they strolled through a small park near the inn, Tessa suddenly stopped and looked at Adam. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for not giving up on me." Adam smiled, a genuine smile that he rarely showed. "I'll never give up on you, Tessa." And for the first time, she believed someone's promises. A few nights later, Adam had sensed that something was wrong with Tessa during his last visit to the inn. She was paler than usual, her hands trembled as she held the hot tea he had brought, and her breathing seemed heavy. "You don't look well, Tessa," he had said, concerned. "Are you sure everything's all right?" "I'm fine, Adam, just a bit tired," she replied with a forced smile, but he knew that wasn't true. The next morning his intuition was confirmed. When he arrived at the inn to visit her, he was informed by the receptionist that Tessa had taken ill during the night and had been rushed to the nearest hospital. Feeling a wave of panic, Adam grabbed his car and drove to the hospital. Adam entered the hospital with quick steps, ignoring the people around him. After a few questions at reception, he was directed to the floor where Tessa was being treated. He found her in a small room, lying on a bed with white sheets, connected to a heart monitoring machine. She looked frail, but conscious. "Adam?" Her voice was weak but surprised. "What are you doing here? What am I doing here?" He approached the bed, pulling out a chair to sit next to her. "I should be asking you that. Why didn't you tell me you were feeling so bad?" Tessa sighed, looking down at her skinny hands on the sheets. "I didn't want to worry you. I thought it was just tiredness." Adam pressed his lips together, holding back the urge to scold her. "You can't ignore things like that, Tessa. Your health is important." Before she could reply, a doctor entered the room, holding a clipboard. He looked at Adam and then at Tessa with a professional smile. "Miss Walker, how are you feeling now?" asked the doctor. "A little better, I think," she replied with a small smile. "But what have I got, doctor? Is it something serious?" The doctor straightened his glasses and consulted his clipboard. "Well, we did some tests to better understand what's causing your weakness and dizziness, and we've actually found something that could explain the symptoms." Tessa and Adam looked at each other, tension growing in the air. "What is it?" asked Adam, unable to contain his anxiety. The doctor paused, as if choosing the right words. "Ms. Walker, the test showed that you are pregnant." For a moment, the room was absolutely silent. Tessa blinked, stunned, as if the doctor's words had taken a while to make sense. "Pregnant?" she repeated almost in a whisper. "That can't be right. There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake, Ms. Walker," the doctor said gently. "You're early in your pregnancy, probably between 8 and 10 weeks. Adam, who was sitting on the side of the bed, froze. He felt the blood leave his face as the words echoed in his mind, "pregnant." He looked at Tessa, trying to process what that meant. How is that possible?" Tessa asked, still in shock. She looked lost, as if her mind was trying to grasp for any logical explanation. The doctor gave her a reassuring smile. "Pregnancy can be unexpected, but it's a blessing for many. We'll monitor you closely to make sure everything goes well, considering your recent health. I'll let you process the news. If you need anything, just call." With that, the doctor left, leaving Adam and Tessa alone in the room. "You're pregnant," Adam finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost incredulous. He looked at Tessa, waiting for some reaction, some confirmation. She covered her face with her hands, her breathing quickening. I didn't plan this, Adam. I swear I didn't plan it. God, what am I going to do now? I don't want to drag you into this. You've already done so much for me, Adam. Please, I don't want you to feel trapped. I'll find a way. Stuck? He frowned, his voice becoming quieter. Tessa, I would never think that. This isn't about being trapped. It's about responsibility. It's about the fact that we're both in this now, together. She shook her head, still incredulous, tears falling. I don't know how to do this, Adam. I can barely look after myself. Then we'll learn together, he said, taking her hand. I don't know how to do it either, but I know I won't let you go through it alone. The conversation went on for hours, with both of them trying to process the situation. Adam promised that he would take care of her and the baby, but Tessa was still reluctant. I don't want to be a burden to you, Adam. God, I swore I wouldn't be a burden to someone again, she said. I want this child to have a good life, but I don't want you to feel that this has ruined your life. You're not a burden, Tessa, he replied firmly, and this child isn't a problem. It's a chance to do something that really matters. Finally, she nodded, allowing herself to trust him. For the first time, Tessa felt that maybe she didn't have to face everything alone. Adam, for his part, began to realize that his life was changing in ways he had never imagined. He, who had always prioritized work and success, now had something else, something that really mattered. The first complication came quickly. A paparazzi, who had been following Adam occasionally in search of gossip about the King of Wall Street, captured images of him leaving the hospital with Tessa. The photos, which showed Adam holding her hand as he helped her into his car, were suggestive enough to fuel speculation. The next day, the headlines exploded. Billionaire Adam Stewart involved with pregnant former homeless woman. Scandal of the year. Who is the mysterious woman who stole the heart of the King of Wall Street? Adam received the news while reviewing a report in his office. Ricardo Vargas, his partner and longtime friend, entered the room with a tablet in hand, his eyebrows furrowed in concern. "Have you seen this?" asked Ricardo, tossing the tablet onto Adam's desk. Adam looked at the screen, where sensationalist headlines flashed in bold letters. He felt a wave of anger rise up inside him. "What the hell is this?" "That's a problem, Adam," Ricardo replied. "Your image is being dragged through the garbage. Investors are calling, worried about the impact of this on the company." "Impact?" Adam stood up, frustration evident in his voice. "How does this affect the company? My personal life has nothing to do with Stewart Capital." Ricardo crossed his arms, his expression serious. "You know that's not how it works. When you're the face of a company like ours, everything you do reflects on it. And now everyone is talking about you and this woman. That woman has a name, Ricardo. It's Tessa, and she's going to have my child." Adam stepped forward, looking directly into Ricardo's eyes. "If the investors can't handle it, that's their problem." Ricardo was silent for a moment, surprised by Adam's firmness. "All right. But you know it's going to get ugly. The media won't let you go." "I don't care about the media. All that matters now is Tessa and the baby." While Adam dealt with the repercussions at work, Tessa faced a different kind of judgment. After the news of her pregnancy spread, people began to look at her differently. At the hostel where she was staying, she heard whispers and nasty comments. "Look, the poor thing managed to get pregnant by a billionaire. How clever. She must be an opportunist. How did someone like her manage to hook a man like Adam Stewart?" She tried to ignore it, but the words hurt her. She had always prided herself on her independence, even in the worst of circumstances. Now she felt as if everyone saw her as someone who had taken advantage of Adam. One evening, when Adam came to visit her, she finally got it off her chest. "I don't know if I can do this, Adam. Everyone is judging me. They think I'm only with you because of the money." "Let them think what they want," Adam replied, holding her hand. "They don't know anything about you, about us." "But those words are cruel," she said, with tears in her eyes. "And it hurts." Adam squeezed her hand tighter. "I know, love. It doesn't matter what they say. What matters is our truth. We'll get through this together. They'll say what they want, but that doesn't define who you are. You're more than what these people think. And if I have to, I'll shout it for the whole world to hear." As the pregnancy progressed, Adam decided that Tessa could no longer stay at the inn. Despite her initial reluctance, she finally agreed to move into his penthouse on the Upper East Side. "It's not forever," she said as she packed her few things, "just until the baby is born." "No rush," Adam replied with a smile. The move brought Tessa more comfort, but also more complications. She began to feel constant pain and extreme tiredness, which worried Adam. He hired the best doctors to accompany her, but even so the tension increased. "You need more rest," Adam said one evening when he found her trying to organize the baby clothes that had arrived. "Let me take care of that." "I can't just lie around all day, Adam," she replied stubbornly. "I need to do something to feel useful." "You're carrying our child," he said, taking the clothes from her hands. "That's more than enough." The complications culminated in an emergency a few weeks later. It was early morning when Adam was woken up by Tessa, who was crying and holding her stomach. "Adam, something's wrong," she said, her voice shaking. Without wasting any time, he picked her up in his arms and took her to the hospital. During the journey, he tried to stay calm, but his heart was racing. The thought of losing Tessa or the baby was unbearable. At the hospital, The doctors immediately took her to the emergency room. Adam stayed in the waiting room, pacing back and forth, phone in hand, trying to find answers. Ricardo arrived shortly afterwards, offering support. "She'll be fine, Adam," said Ricardo, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Tessa is strong." After hours of waiting, the doctor finally appeared. "She and the baby are stable now," he said. "But the pregnancy is high risk. We need to monitor her closely over the next few weeks." Adam let out a sigh of relief, but the worry was still evident on his face. He knew that the road ahead would be full of challenges, but he was determined to face each one. When Tessa woke up, Adam was beside her, holding her hand. "You scared me," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought I was going to lose the baby," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I won't let anything happen to you two," Adam promised. "I don't care what the world thinks, what other people say. All that matters is you and this child, and I'm going to do everything in my power to protect you." Tessa looked at him, seeing the determination in his eyes, and although she was still scared, she knew she wasn't alone. Despite the challenges, the relationship between Adam and Tessa was deepening. He was there for her at all times, even when she was fighting her own insecurity. "Why are you doing all this, Adam?" she asked one evening as they sat in the living room. "I know you say it's for me and the baby, but this isn't what you expected for your life." Adam was silent for a moment, thinking of the best way to respond. "Maybe it wasn't what I expected, Tessa, but it's what I needed." "Needed?" She frowned, confused. "My life was empty before you," he admitted. "I thought work and success were everything, but you and the baby showed me that there is something more, something that really matters." Tessa felt her eyes fill with tears. She'd never imagined that someone like Adam could be so vulnerable, so honest. "I don't know what I did to deserve you." "You didn't do anything, Tessa," he said with a small smile. "You just are, and that's more than enough." After everything they'd been through, Tessa and Adam made a decision. They would face the world together. They knew the road would be difficult, but they also knew they had something stronger than criticism or prejudice. One sunny morning, Adam announced that he would be holding a press conference to clarify the situation. Tessa was hesitant at first, but he convinced her. "If people want to talk about us, then let's give them the truth," he said. "No more speculation." When the day of the press conference arrived, Adam took the stage next to Tessa, holding her hand. He spoke firmly, but also with emotion. "Yes, Tessa is pregnant. Yes, the baby is mine. And no, I'm not ashamed or sorry. I'm proud. Proud to be the man by her side, to be the father of this baby, and to be building something that is more important than anything I've ever done before." Tessa squeezed his hand, feeling Adam's unwavering support. For the first time, she didn't care what people thought. She had Adam, and together they had something that no one could destroy. The months passed with a mixture of tension and preparation. Adam kept his promise to protect Tessa and the baby, taking every possible measure to ensure their safety and comfort. Despite the complications and outside criticism, the bond between them only grew. And then came the most awaited and dreaded moment: the birth. It was an early spring morning when Tessa woke up to intense pain in her lower back. She tried to get up, but the pain was so severe that she could barely move. "Adam!" she called, her voice weak. Adam, who had developed the habit of sleeping in the room next to hers so that he would always be close by, arrived within seconds. "Tessa, what's wrong?" I think it's time," she said, breathing hard. Without wasting any time, Adam loaded her into the car and drove at high speed to the hospital. Although he was always calm and controlled in business, he was now visibly nervous. "Breathe, Tessa. We're almost there," he said, more to himself than to her. When they arrived at the hospital, a medical team was already waiting for them. Tessa was taken immediately to the delivery room, while Adam filled out the paperwork, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The birth was more difficult than expected. Tessa's pre-eclampsia condition made everything more risky, and the doctors decided to perform an emergency cesarean section. Adam was allowed into the room, wearing a surgical gown and a disposable hat. He held Tessa's hand, trying to convey calm while inside he was terrified. "You're doing fine," he said, his voice low and shaky. Tessa looked at him, sweat dripping down her forehead. "Adam, if something happens to me—" "Don't say that," he interrupted, squeezing her hand. "Nothing will happen. You and the baby will be fine." But as the doctors worked, Adam felt the weight of uncertainty. He had never felt so powerless. This was a kind of battle he couldn't control, a risk that no amount of money could minimize. After moments that seemed like an eternity, the sound of faint crying filled the room. Adam and Tessa looked at each other, tears in their eyes. "It's a girl," the doctor announced with a smile. "Congratulations." Tessa held little Sophia in her arms for the first time, and all her fears disappeared. The baby was small and fragile, but perfect. She had Tessa's dark eyes and Adam's light brown hair. "She's beautiful," said Tessa, her voice breaking. "Adam, look at her." Adam, who had never imagined that anything could shake his facade of coolness, felt his heart melt as he looked at his daughter. He moved closer, touching Sophia's small hand with his finger. "She's more than beautiful," he said. "She's a miracle." As time passed, the media attention subsided, allowing Adam, Tessa, and Sophia to start building a life together. Adam took an extended leave from work, something that surprised his partners and the press. "My priority is my family," he told the board, making it clear that he didn't regret his decision. Tessa, for her part, began to regain her confidence. She returned to writing, something she had always loved, and began to think of ways to help other women facing similar situations. Sophia grew up strong and healthy, surrounded by her parents' love. She became the center of their world, living proof that, even in the midst of so much adversity, something beautiful could flourish. One night, as Tessa watched Adam put Sophia to sleep, she felt a wave of gratitude. Her life had been a series of losses and challenges, but now she had something she had never imagined possible: a family. Adam turned around, realizing that she was watching him. "What's wrong?" he asked with a small smile. I never thought I'd have this," she said, her voice breaking. "You deserve all this, Tessa, and so much more." She smiled, taking his hand. "I think I finally believe that." As little Sophia slept peacefully in her crib, Adam and Tessa stood there, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future brought, together. 5 years had passed since Sophia's birth, and the Stewart family's life had changed in ways no one could have predicted. At first, there were doubts and prejudices, but now the world was witnessing something extraordinary. Sophia, Adam and Tessa's daughter, was a musical prodigy. At the age of 5, she mastered the piano in a way that thrilled even the most rigid critics. Every note she played seemed to carry not only talent, but also the depth of her parents' experiences. Sophia's talent was discovered by chance when Adam saw her playing a small toy keyboard that he had bought for her one afternoon. Despite the simplicity of the instrument, the 3-year-old began to reproduce complex melodies she had heard on the radio. "Tessa, you have to see this!" exclaimed Adam, amazed, as he recorded his daughter in a video. He uploaded the clip to Instagram just to share the moment with friends and family, but what happened next surprised even him. The video went viral. Music producers, renowned music schools, and even famous composers started contacting Adam and Tessa. "Your daughter is a genius," they said. At first, Tessa hesitated. She didn't want Sophia to be exposed so early to the world that had once judged her. But Adam, with his protective instinct, ensured that everything would be done at their pace and on their terms. At the age of 5, Sophia gave her first public performance in a crowded New York theater. Sitting at a Steinway & Sons piano, her feet barely reaching the pedals, she played a Beethoven sonata with such emotion and precision that she had the entire audience on their feet, applauding before she had finished. Her name was in all the papers the next morning, Sophia Stewart, the genius who came from nothing. With Sophia's sudden fame, the media focus turned to her family. Adam managed to keep the attention under control for a while, but Tessa's past was a full plate for sensationalist journalists. An interview on a TV program brought to light the difficulties she had faced before meeting Adam. "You were homeless, right?" asked the presenter, his voice tinged with curiosity and a slight tone of judgment. "How did you go from someone who had nothing to the mother of one of the most talented children in the world?" Tessa swallowed. For a moment, she considered dodging the question, but then realized that this was an opportunity to be honest, not just with the audience, but with herself. "Yes, I was a homeless person," she said, her voice firm but charged with emotion. "And it was the hardest time of my life. I lost everything, my home, my job, my dignity, but I never lost the will to fight. And it was that fight that brought me here. Not by luck or chance, but because I learned to get up every time I fell." The room fell silent. The presenter, taken aback by Tessa's vulnerability, didn't know what to say. But the audience at home reacted overwhelmingly. Thousands of messages flooded social media, many from people who identified with her story. "You are an inspiration," they said. "Your strength gives us hope." Meanwhile, Sophia continued to enchant the world. Her first international piano competition took place in Vienna, Austria, where she competed against young prodigies from all over the world. Expectations were high, but no one was prepared for what Sophia would do. When it was her turn to play, she took to the stage in a simple white dress and sat down at the grand piano. The audience was eager to hear a classical piece, but Sophia surprised everyone by announcing that she would be playing a composition of her own. "This piece is called The Price of Love," she said in a sweet but confident voice. "It's for my parents." The first notes sounded soft and melancholy, as if they were telling a story of pain and loss. But as the song progressed, it became more vibrant, more hopeful, until it culminated in a heart-wrenching finale that brought many people in the audience to tears. When Sophia finished, there was a moment of absolute silence before the theatre erupted in applause and shouts. People were on their feet, some wiping away tears. It was more than a musical performance. It was a message, proof that love can transform lives. That night, after the performance, Adam and Tessa watched Sophia sleep in her hotel room. The little girl was still holding a teddy bear, a reminder that despite her extraordinary talent, she was still a child. "Do you think she understands the impact she's made?" asked Tessa, looking at Adam. "Not completely," he replied, smiling, "but I think she does. And somehow she's managed to capture everything we've been through in her music." Tessa sighed, hugging Adam. "I still wonder how we got here. It all seems so impossible, so far away, and now we have Sophia, and she's everything." Adam kissed her forehead. "Because we faced it together, because we never gave up on each other." He play The Price of Love has become a symbol of hope, not just for Adam, Tessa and Sophia, but for thousands of people around the world. It was played at charity events, used in documentaries, and even adopted by movements promoting support for people in vulnerable situations. Tessa and Adam, inspired by their journey, created a foundation to help women in similar situations to those Tessa faced. "If our story can change one life, then it was all worth it," said Tessa in an interview. Sophia continued to grow, not just as a pianist, but as a young woman determined to use her talent to make a difference. And while her fame grew, Adam and Tessa ensured that she never lost sight of what really mattered: the love that brought them together and made them strong. I appreciate you sharing this moment with us. Every story I tell is crafted with dedication and care, with a view to touching the hearts of those who listen. If this narrative has awakened something in you, please consider signing up so that we can continue together on this journey of telling stories that move. Your support is essential if we are to continue sharing these unique experiences. Cheers, and we'll see you in the next story.